Winter of 1873, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city humming with the quiet industry of German immigrants, their breath rising in the bitter cold like ghosts in the frozen air. But behind the brick facades and the rhythmic clatter of brewery machines, something unexplainable had emerged, a child who seemed to see the invisible, calculate the impossible, and read the patterns of life itself. Her name was Emma Richter. At just 11 years old, she could recite entire conversations word for word, calculate the day of the week for any date in history, and measure distances between buildings with the precision of a surveyor. The adults of the German quarter first marveled at her brilliance. They whispered that Emma's mind was a gift from God, a divine anomaly that justified their faith in a new world. But marvel soon curdled into fear. When she began speaking of things no one should know, predicting deaths, exposing secret affairs, reciting crimes that seemed invisible, her community's awe twisted into terror. One morning, seated at her kitchen table, Emma announced the exact minute a man would die. The man died at that precise moment, and this was only the beginning. Her abilities were more than genius. They were a portal into a hidden reality that most were blind to. Patterns, behavior, numbers. They weren't just numbers and actions to Emma. They were threads in a tapestry of secrets, woven into the very structure of her small world. She watched the community with the mechanical calm of a mind that could not forget, could not overlook, could not unsee. Every step, every deviation from routine, every small lie, Emma registered it all. The seemingly mundane became foreboding under her gaze. But what terrified the adults most wasn't the mathematics or the predictions. It was the certainty. Emma spoke with the authority of a prophet and the precision of a machine. Her gray eyes, wide and unsettlingly focused, seemed to penetrate the veil separating ordinary life from its hidden undercurrents. And slowly the whispers began. Some called her blessed, others whispered of curses, dark pacts, unnatural insight. By the time spring approached, the quiet hum of the German quarter had shifted. Fear had settled like a fog over the red brick streets. A child had become a mirror, reflecting truths no one wanted to confront. And as Emma began to expose the hidden patterns of life and death around her, a chilling realization gripped the community. Some knowledge is forbidden for a reason. By February of 1873, the Richter household had become a theater of quiet dread. Snow piled against the windows, muffling the sounds of the outside world, while inside, Emma sat at her small kitchen table, methodically counting, observing, calculating. Every neighbor was a data set, every routine a variable. She recorded what adults overlooked, the precise number of steps Mr. Kruger took to the brewery, the way Mrs. Fisher arranged her laundry, the fluctuations in a man's drinking habits. To Emma, these were not idle curiosities. They were signals, patterns pointing to inevitable consequences. One gray morning, she broke the silence of breakfast with words that froze her mother's hands mid-motion. "Mr. Dietrich will not come home from the brewery today," she said. "He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 2. Greta Richter's heart seized. The child's eyes, so calm and precise, gave no room for doubt. Yet the words themselves were impossible, unthinkable. Heinrich Richter, practical and grounded, dismissed it at first as childish fantasy. But as the minutes passed, the chill in the room became undeniable. 14 minutes past 2. The door to the malt room opened, and Jan Dietrich collapsed. Heart failure, the doctor would say later, brought on by chronic alcohol poisoning. But to the Richter family, the calculus was clear. Emma had predicted death. It was not luck. It was observation. It was pattern recognition on a scale humans were not meant to comprehend. Every deviation, every irregularity, every subtle change in behavior was a signal she could decode with terrifying accuracy. Mr. Dietrich's steps had changed. His drinking patterns had shifted. Emma had calculated the precise outcome, down to the minute, before anyone else had even realized the danger. And when she spoke, she was neither frightened nor excited. She was simply stating a truth the world had not yet acknowledged. Patterns govern life, and those who understand them can see the inevitable. Word spread quickly through the German quarter. Some called her a miracle, others whispered of unnatural power. Father Koller, once a firm believer in divine blessing, now hesitated to speak. Even her own parents, who had nurtured her intellect, began to fear what she was becoming. The line between genius and horror was thin, and Emma was stepping over it without hesitation. She began to speak of other secrets, affairs, hidden thefts, conflicts no adult dared confront. Her calculations revealed vulnerabilities in every household, patterns that predicted scandal and disaster. And yet, the adults could not ignore her. Each prediction proved accurate, each observation correct. The child became both oracle and judge, observing, calculating, condemning, all without malice, yet with consequences that left the community trembling. The Richter home became a quiet chamber of inevitability. Emma's mind, vast and unyielding, processed the neighborhood as a mathematician might process numbers, relentless, unfeeling, precise. Those who believed themselves careful, secretive, safe, now discovered the terrifying truth. There is no secrecy from a mind like hers. And the longer she watched, the more the world revealed itself, not as people wished it to be, but as it truly was, a lattice of patterns, corruption, and hidden dangers waiting to be calculated. By early March, the German quarter of Milwaukee had begun to shift in subtle, uneasy ways. Streets that once echoed with laughter now carried hushed footsteps. Neighbors glanced nervously from windows, whispered behind hands, and avoided the Richter house altogether. Emma's eyes, wide and unblinking, had become a mirror reflecting truths no one wanted to see. The child who counted steps and recited conversations now calculated betrayals, scandals, and crimes that had been buried under years of routine and habit. It began with minor disturbances, secrets exposed, small deceptions laid bare, but it quickly escalated. Emma spoke casually of hidden meetings and clandestine rendezvous. Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11. She told her mother one morning, peeling potatoes with mechanical precision. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence. Greta Richter's hands trembled. Emma, you must not say such things, she whispered, but the words were already facts, not conjecture. The next day unfolded exactly as predicted. Confrontation, bloodied pride, shattered trust. And for the neighborhood, the realization struck like a hammer. Emma Richter was not merely observant. She was inevitable. The adults, steeped in centuries of social norms and polite deceit, suddenly understood that their private lives were no longer private. Every habitual step, every deviation from routine, every small indulgence was being recorded, analyzed, and inevitably exposed. Emma's mind operated like a dark clockwork engine, cold, unerring, and indifferent to human comfort. She did not judge, she did not gloat, she simply revealed, and revelation in her world came with consequences. Even her parents, who had once admired her gifts, now recoiled from them. Hinrich, practical to a fault, felt a gnawing dread each time his daughter spoke. Greta, once proud of Emma's intelligence, now feared what people would think, or worse, what Emma herself might decide. The child's abilities blurred the line between prophecy and intrusion, between curiosity and omniscience. And as she began to expose the patterns of life and death around her, it became clear that knowledge is never neutral. Every truth she uncovered carried weight, and sometimes that weight fell with devastating precision. By mid-March, 3 deaths had already shaken the German quarter. Accidents, missteps, and sudden illness struck those whose patterns Emma had observed most carefully. Some dismissed them as coincidence. But coincidence is a luxury in a world where patterns are visible to a mind like Emma's. Those who survived whispered of her presence like a shadow over the streets. The child at the kitchen window had become a silent arbiter of fate, calculating outcomes invisible to ordinary men, and revealing secrets that had been protected for generations. And yet, Emma's observations were not random. They were intentional, precise, and inescapable. She had begun to understand her own power, the way patterns obeyed her scrutiny, the way human weakness could be predicted with the same certainty as arithmetic. To witness her mind in motion was to glimpse the machinery of destiny itself, and for those around her it was terrifying. What they once considered ordinary life was, under Emma Richter's gaze, an intricate web of inevitabilities, waiting for the child who could see the world the way it truly was. Spring in 1873 should have brought renewal, but in Milwaukee's German Quarter it arrived like a slow-moving shadow. Emma Richter's gaze had become inescapable, her calculations extending beyond numbers into the moral and the dangerous. She no longer merely predicted death or exposed clandestine meetings. She anticipated the collapse of social order, the unraveling of carefully maintained facades, and the inevitability of human folly. Each day her observations sharpened, her calculations became more precise, and the weight of her knowledge grew heavier, almost unbearable. It was on a pale March morning that Emma delivered another chilling pronouncement. Sitting at the kitchen table, buttering her bread with unhurried exactness, she said, "Tomorrow, Mrs. Schneider will bury something in her garden after church. It is not soil she hides, but guilt. Her husband will discover it within 7 days, and it will lead to disgrace." Greta Richter froze. Hinrich, standing at the stove, felt the same cold tremor that had accompanied Jan Dietrich's death. How could an 11-year-old know? How could she calculate the trajectories of secrecy, betrayal, and discovery with such flawless precision? The next day, Emma's prediction played out exactly as she had said. Mr. Schneider unearthed a bundle wrapped in cloth, containing evidence of stolen money from the brewery accounts. The scandal tore through the community, leaving whispers, fear, and broken trust in its wake. Some of the neighbors began to avoid the Richter home entirely. Others watched from afar, fearful yet unable to resist the pull of her revelations. It became apparent that Emma was not just observing, she was decoding the invisible patterns that governed human behavior, and her insights carried consequences far beyond mere curiosity. Even the clergy and the authorities began to grow uneasy. Father Collar, once certain of divine blessing, now hesitated in Emma's presence. There was something about her eyes, gray, unblinking, and calculating, that made him question the line between divine insight and something far more unsettling. Perhaps it was the child's capacity to see what should remain hidden, to calculate what should remain unknown, that unsettled him most. Emma's gift had evolved beyond simple observation into something far darker, an awareness that could manipulate, predict, and ultimately control the world around her. The Richter parents, caught between awe and terror, realized that their daughter's abilities could not be contained or explained. The quiet, insulated world of their home had transformed into a chamber of inevitability. Every pattern, every habit, every secret in the German Quarter could now be read with mathematical precision, and each revelation carried the weight of consequences. Emma's mind had become a lens through which the ordinary world revealed its hidden corruption, its buried dangers, and its unavoidable tragedies. By now, the neighborhood understood the truth, even if they feared to speak it aloud. Emma Richter was not merely a prodigy. She was a force, a silent, calculating, inescapable observer of life, who exposed the fragile veneer of morality, secrecy, and social order. And as spring deepened, it became clear that her presence had altered the rhythm of the quarter itself. Normalcy was impossible. The patterns of human behavior, once taken for granted, were now under the scrutiny of a child who saw them with unflinching clarity. In Emma's world, ignorance was no longer an option. By mid-March, the quiet streets of Milwaukee's German Quarter were thick with unease. Children no longer played openly. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones and checked their routines. Every routine, every small indulgence, every hidden act became a potential target for Emma Richter's unrelenting observation. Her mind, precise as a machine and as relentless as time itself, had begun to map the invisible currents of human behavior, currents that others would have preferred remain hidden. It began with a whispered warning. Emma, sitting at the kitchen table, spoke of a brewing confrontation. Mr. Weber will return early tomorrow. Anna will be with Mr. Kellner. Violence is inevitable. Greta Richter's hands shook as she clutched the peeling knife she was using for potatoes. Heinrich's jaw tightened, a cold dread settling over him. The next morning, Mr. Weber arrived precisely 47 minutes early, just as Emma had calculated. The confrontation left Ernst Kellner battered, Anna Weber bruised and shaken, and the German quarter buzzing with shock and fear. Emma had done more than observe. She had foretold chaos with unerring precision. As word spread, the boundary between fear and fascination dissolved. Some began to whisper that Emma's mind was unnatural, that she wielded power no child should possess. Father Koller, once a source of spiritual guidance, avoided the Richter home, unsettled by the unflinching clarity in her eyes. The adults began to realize that Emma's abilities were not merely mathematical. They were psychological, predictive, almost manipulative. She understood human behavior with the same certainty a scientist understands equations, and she could expose the inevitable consequences of human weakness before they even occurred. Emma herself remained calm, almost indifferent to the chaos she forecasted. But her precision carried a weight. Every prediction she voiced became a self-fulfilling prophecy, a demonstration of the fragile structure upon which ordinary life relied. The community could no longer hide. Secrets, affairs, thefts, lies were visible under her calculating gaze, and those who had once considered themselves clever now realized their vulnerabilities were laid bare. Patterns, to Emma, were immutable. Humans in their repetition and predictability became predictable equations waiting to be solved. It was here, at the precipice of knowledge and fear, that the community faced an uncomfortable truth. Emma Richter was not a child to be guided or corrected. She was a force of revelation, a lens into the forbidden architecture of their lives. And in that moment, as whispers of fear and fascination intertwined, the first symbolic step toward transformation occurred, not just for Emma, but for anyone who dared to confront the reality she exposed. Take a moment. Comment "I see the pattern" twice below. Do it now. This is not idle participation. It is a lock, a signal that you are acknowledging what many refuse to see. Your understanding begins here. Patterns govern life. Secrets do not remain hidden. And once you have glimpsed the machinery of inevitability, there is no returning to ignorance. By late March, the German quarter was transformed. Fear had taken root in the streets, in homes, and in the hearts of men who once considered themselves in control of their own lives. Emma Richter, 11 years old, had become the invisible arbiter of fate. Her mind a relentless engine calculating the inevitabilities hidden in every habitual step, every whispered secret, every lie disguised as normalcy. Those who had ignored her predictions now understood. Her words were not warnings, they were proofs, and their lives followed her calculations with terrifying fidelity. Emma's observations no longer focused on single households. She began connecting patterns across the neighborhood, uncovering hidden alliances, betrayals, and systemic corruption within the tight-knit immigrant community. She noted which men falsified accounts in the breweries, which women concealed debts or illicit affairs, and which families buried secrets so deep even generations might have forgotten. Every deviation from routine was a clue, every repeated behavior a signal. And with the same detached precision she applied to arithmetic, Emma predicted the consequences minute by minute, step by step. The effect on the community was catastrophic. Men became wary of their own routines, women checked every step, and children whispered about the pale girl who could see through walls, through lies, through time itself. Some sought to avoid Emma, hoping ignorance might shield them. Others, driven by morbid fascination, observed her from afar, desperate to glimpse what knowledge she would reveal next, but avoidance was futile. Patterns cannot be hidden from a mind that perceives them. Emma did not need doors unlocked or secrets confessed. She calculated outcomes, and human behavior, in its predictability, revealed itself naturally. Even the Richter household was no longer a refuge. Heinrich and Greta lived in quiet terror of the child they had once cherished for her brilliance. Emma, for her part, displayed no malice, no glee, only the relentless precision of her calculations. She had discovered that human lives were structured in patterns, behavioral equations that could be solved, and once solved, the consequences were unavoidable: death, scandal, ruin, exposure. Emma's mind charted them all. The weight of inevitability pressed down on the German quarter, bending the wills of those who once thought themselves untouchable. It was during this time that Emma began documenting her findings. Her journal, a small leather-bound book, filled with numbers, calculations, and observations, became an encrypted map of the quarter's secrets. Not even her parents could decode it fully. Patterns intertwined with human behavior, patterns linked to timing, movements, and choices, creating a lattice of inevitabilities. Those who glimpsed even fragments of her work understood that Emma Richter had moved beyond prodigy into something far more dangerous, an architect of awareness, a child who revealed truths society had worked decades to bury. And as the quarter continued to tremble beneath her calculations, one truth became unavoidable: knowledge is power. The more she understood, the more the people around her feared, and the more control her insight exerted, unseen yet absolute. In Emma's world, ignorance was no protection, curiosity was no shelter. Only acknowledgement of the patterns, acceptance of their inevitability, and submission to the hidden logic could prevent catastrophe. By April of 1873, the German quarter of Milwaukee had entered a state of quiet chaos. The rhythm of daily life, the predictable movements of men to the breweries, women to the markets, children to the streets, was no longer safe, no longer ordinary. Emma Richter had transformed from a prodigious child into an invisible force capable of predicting, exposing, and even controlling outcomes through observation alone. Every home, every family, every secret habit became points in a system the community could not resist, could not hide from, and could not influence. Emma's predictions became increasingly precise, increasingly personal. She spoke of affairs, thefts, and tragedies that no adult dared acknowledge. One evening, seated at her kitchen window, she announced, "Mr. Kruger will stumble into the canal at 6:42 tomorrow evening. His misstep will be caused by distraction. He will be thinking of stolen coins hidden beneath the floorboards." Her mother gasped. Heinrich, though trying to maintain reason, felt a cold, creeping dread. The next evening, every detail unfolded exactly as Emma had described. The community was no longer confronting coincidence. They were facing inevitability, a relentless force embodied in a child. Fear grew, but so did fascination. People whispered of Emma as if she were a living oracle. Men who had once mocked her abilities now avoided the streets when she was near. Wives checked every action twice. Children hesitated to play. Even Father Collar, who had once praised her gifts as divine, now kept his distance, wary of a mind that could see through human pretense with such clarity. Emma's calculations were not mere numbers. They were an unblinking lens on the hidden, darker currents that shaped lives, marriages, and fortunes. The Richter household became a stage for these revelations. The neighbors came with questions, seeking knowledge or reassurance, but often left with unease or outright terror. Each encounter demonstrated the unyielding power of patterns, how human behavior, repeated day after day, revealed itself to an analytical mind. Emma documented everything, noting deviations, inconsistencies, and convergences in her journal. It was a silent ledger of inevitability, a record that mapped every misstep, betrayal, and act of secrecy with surgical precision. And yet, the most terrifying realization was not the accuracy of her predictions, but the inevitability behind them. Emma had not merely observed the world, she had decoded it. Life, in her eyes, was an equation. Human behavior followed rules, patterns, and probabilities, and once calculated, nothing could alter the outcome. Milwaukee's German quarter had glimpsed the machinery of fate itself, and the revelation left them powerless, suspended in a chilling awareness. Once a mind like Emma Richter's sees the patterns, nothing remains secret, and nothing is safe. By May of 1873, the German quarter of Milwaukee had become a silent battlefield, and Emma Richter, 11 years old, was its unseen commander. Her mind, precise and unrelenting, no longer merely observed patterns. She mapped the consequences of every action, every deception, every deviation from routine. Families whispered behind locked doors, men double-checked every step, and women feared even small indulgences. Emma's calculations had made ordinary life an impossible maze, and the community realized too late that they were living in a world where ignorance offered no protection. It began with subtle exposures. Affairs revealed, theft uncovered, lies so carefully cultivated that generations would have been ashamed to reveal them. Emma laid them bare with detached certainty. She did not gloat, nor did she interfere directly. Her power was quieter, far more dangerous, the ability to predict outcomes and allow them to unfold as she had calculated. And the neighborhood, once confident in its routines and secrets, found itself powerless against the inevitabilities she articulated. Every prediction she made came true, and with each, fear deepened. Her parents, Heinrich and Greta, were caught between awe and terror. Emma had become a mirror, reflecting every hidden flaw and every shadow of human weakness. They had birthed a child prodigy, yes, but one who revealed truths the human mind was not meant to handle. One evening, she spoke of a man's death as if reading a simple equation. Mr. Schneider will not survive the week. His heart will fail because of stress, dishonesty, and overwork. Her father, who had once tried to reason with her, could only feel the cold grip of inevitability tighten around his chest. The precision of her words left no room for argument. The community, sensing the unrelenting clarity of Emma's observations, began to fracture. Men confronted one another with suspicion. Families withdrew into their homes. The bonds that had once held the quarter together weakened under the relentless scrutiny of a child who saw everything. The brewery workers, normally boisterous and confident, whispered about her as if she were a shadow, a force beyond understanding. Some crossed themselves, others avoided the streets entirely, and all understood a single terrifying fact. Emma Richter could predict, and her predictions were always true. It was in this crucible of fear that the most profound lesson of Emma's mind emerged. Knowledge is not neutral. To see the patterns behind human behavior is not merely to understand. It is to command, whether consciously or not. And the people of Milwaukee's German quarter discovered that when a child sees everything, their lives cease to be ordinary. Each step, each choice, each hidden act is observed, calculated, and exposed. The machinery of inevitability has no mercy, no bias, and no escape. And once the gears are set in motion, even the most careful human effort cannot alter the outcome. By summer of 1873, the German quarter of Milwaukee had become a community unrecognizable to itself. The streets were quiet, homes shuttered, and conversations cautious, as though even a single word could unravel lives. Emma Richter, the 11-year-old with gray, unblinking eyes, had become an unseen arbiter of inevitability. Her calculations were no longer confined to individual households. They extended across the entire quarter, mapping secrets, betrayals, and the hidden mechanics of human behavior with precision that defied explanation. Neighbors began to speak of her in fearful whispers. Some claimed she could read thoughts. Others insisted she could manipulate events with nothing more than observation. Emma, for her part, showed no malice, only relentless focus. Her presence was like gravity, invisible, unyielding, and inescapable. She documented patterns in a small leather-bound journal, numbers, sequences, probabilities, creating a lattice of inevitability that no adult could comprehend and no deception could escape. Families began to crumble under the weight of exposure. Affairs ended in confrontation, thefts were revealed, and long-buried secrets erupted into public shame. Even those who attempted to resist her calculations found themselves ensnared. Men who sought to alter routines discovered that their attempts only confirmed her predictions. Women who tried to conceal indiscretions were outmaneuvered by the immutable logic of observation. Emma had become a silent judge and a prophet rolled into one, a child who understood human behavior not as moral or ethical, but as equations to be solved. And each revelation carried consequences: despair, confrontation, violence, or death. Her parents, Heinrich and Greta Richter, were trapped between pride and horror. They had birthed a mind of extraordinary brilliance, but it had become something darker, something unstoppable. Emma's calculations revealed not just actions, but inevitabilities, truths that humans were never meant to see. They watched in silent terror as neighbors fled in fear, and as the quarter itself seemed to shrink under the weight of observation. Every household was transparent, every secret illuminated, and every life subtly altered by the knowledge she possessed. By the time the first hints of July arrived, 3 men were dead, scandals had erupted, and at least one family had fled under the cover of night. Emma's journal remained locked away, filled with sequences no one dared to decipher. Her calculations were no longer merely mathematical. They had become a language of power, a map of control, and a revelation that knowledge itself could be weaponized. In that summer of fear and inevitability, the German quarter learned the most dangerous truth of all. A mind like Emma Richter's does not simply observe, it transforms reality, and in doing so, it leaves nothing and no one untouched. By late summer of 1873, the German quarter of Milwaukee had become a place of hushed steps and wary glances. Emma Richter, the child who had seen everything, calculated everything, had begun to vanish from the lives around her even before she disappeared entirely. Her presence remained, etched into the community like an indelible shadow, her influence lingering in every misstep, every exposed secret, every fear that had been awakened. She had shown them the machinery of inevitability, and in doing so, had altered the trajectory of every household she observed. Then, without warning, Emma was gone. No farewell, no explanation. Heinrich and Greta searched tirelessly, questioning neighbors, retracing routines, hoping for a glimpse, a clue, but found only silence. Her small bedroom was undisturbed, her journal still locked away, filled with numbers and calculations no one dared decipher. And yet, despite her absence, the consequences of her observations continued to unfold. Secrets that she had predicted came to light, misdeeds she had traced were revealed, and lives she had quietly watched were irrevocably altered. Emma Richter had vanished, but the pattern she had imposed on the quarter remained immutable and inescapable. The community struggled to understand what had occurred. Some whispered of divine intervention, others spoke in fearful tones of unnatural power. Father Collar, once certain of her blessing, now spoke in hushed confessions, admitting that perhaps some minds are not meant to walk among mortals. Heinrich and Greta lived the rest of their lives in quiet dread, knowing that their daughter's abilities were more than brilliance. They were a force, a lens on the hidden machinery of existence that ordinary humans could neither comprehend nor resist. Emma's journal became legend, a silent testament to a mind that had mapped the invisible currents of human behavior with surgical precision. Generations would speak of her in whispers, passing stories of the pale girl with gray eyes who had predicted death, exposed secrets, and revealed the hidden patterns of the human soul. And yet, no one could ever unlock the full scope of her work. The sequences, the numbers, the calculated inevitabilities, they remained a dark testament to the truth she had uncovered. That life is governed not by chance, but by patterns, and those who can perceive them wield power beyond ordinary comprehension. The German quarter would never recover its innocence. Every glance over a shoulder, every step taken in private, every secret carefully hidden, Emma had shown them that nothing escapes observation. Nothing avoids the inevitabilities she calculated. Her disappearance was the final proof. Knowledge once acquired cannot be undone. Awareness once awakened cannot be silenced. Emma Richter had left the world of Milwaukee forever, but the echo of her calculations, the chilling certainty of her insight, would haunt every life she touched. And in that echo, the most terrifying truth remained. Once a mind like Emma Richter's has seen the patterns, the world itself becomes transparent, and nothing is ever the same again.